We're just 2 weeks away from the first voting in the Iowa caucuses, and polls indicate that any one of the top four candidates can win the Iowa caucuses. In 2008, Jon Favreau's candidate, Barack Obama, won the Iowa caucuses, and the rest is history. And now Jon Favreau is talking to voters who voted for Barack Obama, but then didn't vote or voted for a third-party candidate in 2016 when Donald Trump was running.
How many people, show of hands, are planning on voting in 2020? Everyone's voting. All right, how many people are definitely not voting for Trump? So no one's definitely, okay. Who is definitely voting for the Democratic nominee? 1, 2, 3. 3 people. Okay.
So far.
So this is fascinating.
And we're back with Jon Favreau. It sure is fascinating, John, because if that holds up across the country in those swing states, then Donald Trump loses, because that vote is the vote by which he won. The people who voted for Barack Obama and then either did not vote or voted third party last time.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely need a lot of those people that I talked to, those kinds of voters, people who sat out in 2016 or voted third party to vote for the Democrat this time. And I think the key is for the Democratic candidates is you have to, the biggest challenge is not just Donald Trump. It is the cynicism and distrust that these voters feel towards all of our political institutions, including the media, including both parties.
And so if the New York Times could not make up its mind about who to choose in the Democratic primaries, these voters seem to have at least as much struggle as the New York Times does.
Yeah, no, I mean, they had heard of Joe Biden. They've heard of Bernie Sanders. A couple had heard of Elizabeth Warren. But that's about it. That's all they had heard about from the Democratic candidates. So I think the candidates have, I mean, look, these candidates have to reach these voters where they are. And because these voters aren't paying as close attention to media and to the news as much as everyone else and a lot of the more committed activists, that means the Democrats need to show up where they live. They need to organize on the ground, and they have to break through this cynicism. And that's going to require more than a critique of Donald Trump, more than a critique of Republican policies, and probably even more than a vision of progressive government. It's going to require persuading people that they can actually deliver on that vision, that we can have a government that functions, that we can have an ethical, honest government that's staffed with public servants who believe in the law, that a Democratic candidate's not going to pay attention to the silly squabbles on Twitter. They're going to pay attention to the big fights that actually matter to most people, and that they're going to represent everyone, no matter who you are, where you come from, what you look like, and who you voted for, because our party is a party that actually believes in democracy.
How do the voters you've been talking to in these groups feel about impeachment?
They don't know much about it. They know what's going on, but when I talked to them, it was during sort of the House hearings, and all they could say was, we heard that people were testifying for a really long time, and that Trump probably did something bad in Ukraine. That's like the most that I got from people.
And just to underline, the point for you was to talk to the voters who don't pay intense attention to what's going on, because they're the late deciders in elections, and they're the ones who, in the end, usually tip it one way or the other. So that's why we were targeting them in your groups, right?
Yeah, that's right, because and they all said that they're going to vote in 2020. So these aren't people who said that they're going to stay home. So they're going to vote one way or the other. But the question is, when do they actually tune in? And in the primary, it's not till the end. And in the general election, it's not till the last couple of weeks.
Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.